Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again Dr. Buck Melton. I think many of our viewers will appreciate and understand his erudite comments, which he tosses like some biblical figure, pearls on the floor.
What does erudite mean?
Erudite?
Yes. I'm sorry. I'm kidding.
Are you going to tell me?
Joking.
That. Pardon-moi.
Did you get it? You see what I did there?
You know, I swung at the pitch. Well, you certainly, you won that little tiff.
Thank you. I rarely do.
Dr. Melton, you won that.
I rarely do. So you
was my pearl analogy. I'll let that go at this point. But welcome. And we've had discussions on vaccines and the Supreme Court and judicial decisions. And maybe we could talk a little bit about other regulations that are out there, and one of them is wearing a mask. And the general debate about this is that initially Dr. Fauci said, well, you don't have to wear them, just trying to preserve the supply for healthcare personnel. Thus, that starts the discussion off on sort of a wrong foot, and there's been a lot of conflicting evidence about whether to wear it or not, and statements and how good the masks are. N95 masks may work, and along with that, it will also, particularly when the epidemic first struck, there was a lot of ideas about rubbing down surfaces with an alcohol sponge or Clearoxing and everything. Any place that human touch could occur might have spread the virus. And I think that idea has fallen out of favor. It's not really out there, but the idea that the virus can be spread by aerosol contamination, and that a mask would not particularly protect you, but it might protect other people. So if you're at risk, if you have a viral infection, you certainly could pass it along to someone else without a mask. Now, do you have any opinions on this subject?
Well, yes, I've got an anecdotal opinion and then just sort of a tort-based opinion. As we said in our previous episode, I don't know if people have seen it, that in tort law, when you're looking at what is reasonable, you look at the burden that a safety measure imposes on you and try to balance that against the risk that you incur by not imposing that safety measure, multiplied by the severity of the injury that results. And based on that calculus, a lot of people say they can't breathe with a mask on. My response is, well, have you tried breathing on a ventilator? It just seems like a very light burden to ward off a very severe risk in other people. Anecdotally, I would say that and I think that for a person of my age, I'm in, knock on wood, in fairly good health. I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10.
10
for somebody. I'd give myself about an 8. I'm fundamentally a healthy person.
Yes.
But I will say that in a teaching environment with lots of students coming in and out, every year I've taught, I've usually gotten some kind of respiratory something.
Yes.
1 or 2 colds a year, the flu now and then.
Yes.
Since we started masking a year and a half ago, and once again, knocking on wood,
yes,
I'm nothing. It is my intention, and other cultures do this. Japan, people have been wearing masks in public for 60 or 70 years. It is my intention to continue wearing masks, especially as I get older and become more at risk. I'm going to keep wearing masks. They seem
well,
to
what
be doing
kind
a
of
job.
mask are you going to wear?
I'm wearing, well, I will show you as a matter
Show
of
the
fact.
viewers your mask.
Yes.
I'm glad you brought
I have
this
a
along.
backup mask here with me today. That's not a mask. I'm sorry, I have to fish around in my pocket here. I have here, for those of you who are Alien fans, a mask for the U.S. CSS Nostromo from Alien. But it's a felt mask. This is a rather thinner mask than I usually wear.
Now, now has this been, well, firstly, that's pretty interesting, and this is by the Wayland, some corporation.
Wayland-Yutani, yes.
Are they the people that put the spaceship up there?
That is correct.
Well, that's pretty impressive.
My masks are usually somewhat thicker than this. They're the jersey, so it's certainly not in.
But have they been? So do they protect you? I mean, are they enough there to protect you? And do they? I mean, there's quite an art to wearing a mask.
Yes.
So you have it really firmly attached around your breathing spots there, and so there's no way anything can leak in.
Probably not.
Yes.
My guess, and it's strictly a guess, and as I say, I freely admitted this is an anecdotal evidence. All I know is A, I've been wearing masks, and B, I have not got any of my usual respiratory infections. My guess, the way it's been protecting me, is it keeps my fingers from touching my mouth or nose. That's what I guess.
Yes.
So.
Well, have you, just to continue on the subject, have you had your flu vaccination?
I usually have not gotten flu vaccinations. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've ever gotten a flu vaccination. I did get the flu once about 7 years ago, and it really took me out of commission for about 6 weeks. So,
well, we've had a big conversation about that,
we
and I think everything that has been said about the coronavirus might be could be used with influenza.
And I have been rethinking that. Definitely.
But particularly because the immune arrangements that take place with some exposure to influenza give you a little protection, but because nothing happened this past year, you're more at risk. And also, just to continue the point, if you haven't had the influenza or any viral infections for many years, your immune system may have grown sluggish.
Yes.
So it may be in your interest to episodically be infected.
But I have the right to control my own body.
We've discovered
yes,
that.
We said
Yes.
If you ask me to give a rationale here, the flu tends to affect less people. It tends to have a lower mortality rate.
It's a relatively big deal, and the amount of people that are killed with influenza, a big number.
Yeah.
And the same at-risk population are generally killed with this. It can be a bad thing, and dealing with it would be a useful story. And there's kind of a balance, but I guess what I'm getting into on the mask story is that if you want to protect yourself, you really need the N95, and that's quite some help there. And then when you wear a mask, you're sort of protecting other people.
Because it's not, the virus can obviously get through this, but it's the particulates on which the virus travels that it kind of blunts when you exhale. That's my understanding.
That's right. And here's another, I think, important fact to get it in front of the public, and this is something it's been fairly neglected in discussions of the pan epidemic, and that is your chances of being infected depend on the inoculum you receive.
Yeah.
So if you just get a few little pesky viral particles wind up in your nose, well, there's a substantial chance there won't be enough to cause any problem. But if you get a huge inoculum, that's what's going to cause problems. So just any reduction in the inoculum that you could receive would be a big thing. And the other thing that's going on with this is that many people that are non-vaccinated or people that are not going to wear masks, maybe students in your class, those people, even if they have vigorous immune systems, everything else being equal, they may actually have a positive test. They could have a positive test. And the test, they would say, well, we're going to isolate you for 2 weeks. Now you've had a positive test. But their viral inoculum may be very small because this is not being freely recorded. And it may well be that it would cause too much confusion in the public. But there's something called CT numbers that go basically from 1 to 100. And it's a log scale. So if your CT number is 1, you've just got trillions and trillions and trillions of viral particles. And even if you're wearing a mask or whatever, you're just I think
you're all floating like crazy.
They're just crazy, wearing a mask, you wrapped up in saran wrap or whatever. You'd still have a substantial chance of passing an inoculum along to someone else. And then if with everything else being equal, if your immune system is vigorous and you've got the ability to handle the virus, your CT numbers may be substantially lower. So for instance, and this is a log scale, so if your number turns out to be 25, it's some kind of it's whatever it is to 10th to the 25th. So it's kind of incredible less of a number.
Yes.
And yet it's still said that you're positive. And in general, the people with younger, very vigorous immune systems do better. The danger, I think, with the mask story is that this, I think, it's particularly happened in nursing homes where some of the stuff is the air circulation is
miserable in a lot of
bad,
places.
And the immune system of a nursing home person would mean that with everything else being equal, they have a big chance of having a very high CT number. Thus, your companion in the nursing home that you joust on the bingo table with, you play bingo or whatever. I think people do that. There are bingo players in the nursing home, and two of them are sitting there, and they're with bad air filtration, bad air circulation, for 6 hours, and the person is just loaded with viral inoculum. The person is sitting there, bad air circulation, and even in those circumstances, even wearing masks, it would not be as beneficial. I mean, presumably it would be helpful. So the masks themselves are not panaceas, and a big missing story from our whole discussion on this, or how infected people are, and the statistics are findable, but they just haven't been produced for some reason. I guess it's these cutoffs are fairly arbitrary. So when people think the cutoff may be around 40. And it could, if it were 30, then
that's a big difference.
It was a big difference.
Very big difference.
And when the numbers are low like this, even though we found some particles there, they're generally not viable. So many people, it's being said, they test positive, they feel fine. They're walking around, they tested positive, and their numbers may be so low, and the viral particles that are discovered are just not so non-active, they're really not too much at risk of doing anything. Yet the government has put these requirements in place because the CDC felt they were facing a crisis, and there was no room for equivocation about. So that's the way it is, and so you wear these masks. And they become less beneficial the less common the virus is. So if, for instance, if we're rapidly approaching the situation, we have, 70% of the country, maybe not as many in Georgia. We lagged a lot with the vaccination arrangements, particularly in middle Georgia. So we had a terrible Delta epidemic, and many people died and were sick, and it was very, very bad. I mean, it's very worthy people were killed, and they without having been vaccinated. That's some subject we were on earlier.
Yes.
But so what I'm getting into is the more not everything, the masks are not a panacea. That's point number one. Secondly, the more people that have either had the virus or have been vaccinated, the less needful it would be, with everything else being equal. But the people that would be protected from this would be a person that had not been vaccinated, pretty much. So the people that get the most benefit from everyone in your classroom wearing masks are the people that have not been vaccinated. Yes. And if everyone has been vaccinated, they become less needful.
Yes. Of course, look on the burden side of things. We're talking about the risk involved. Yes. How much of a burden is it to wear a mask like this? It costs a couple of dollars. It doesn't really restrict your flow of breathing. The burden is, once again, there are many people, and I think that the people who mainly have this complaint are the anti-vaxxers, are to say this is their words, not mine, can't breathe with one of these masks. I personally don't see how anybody could make that argument.
Well, the other point about this is, and I think we could talk about the pros and cons of masks. But firstly, I lose mine. How many times? Where's my mask? I must have a million of them floating around.
I've got to interject there. This is going to be the great age of the cargo pant for me, because these thigh pockets are my mask pockets.
Oh, really?
And I have them. I wear them all the time, never without a
well,
mask.
that's a good ability. Well, I often lose them, but moving past that, one of the things are facial expression and communication. So if you talk to people wearing a mask, it really is, it causes a substantial emotional distance, in my opinion, between the two masked people facing one another, and in some ways it dehumanizes them. I think it really,
no more so than the telephone.
Well, yes, I'll say that. Yeah. I mean, but wearing a mask is it has some negative psychological impacts, particularly true with children. So there's an argument about mask if you're at sixth graders, or some very vigorous sixth graders running around, and they don't, and keeping the mask on is an encumbrance, and it interferes with, I imagine, I'm no expert on this, but I think it's rather difficult to have these young children keep their mask on, let's say 6-year-olds.
Okay, the burden is, if you consciously blink one extra time every 24 hours, then 10 million less people will die per day. Okay, that's about as small a burden as you can get. Perhaps wearing a mask may be slightly more burdensome.
I think it interferes. There's a little interfere with communication, and there are. And just to go through the O2 sat story, so there are people that it does have an impact on. I mean, they're not so common, but if you drop your O2 sats, that might be something. And additionally, let's say people on airplanes with sleep apnea. I mean, I'm picking some examples here. They doze off on the plane wearing sleep apnea, and it could drop it could contribute to dropping their O2 sat. So you could say that.
What number of people would this affect? I mean,
a lot of people have sleep. I mean, I think the sleep apnea people that are on airplanes, and they're up for a long time, it must be a small number.
So could we use a face shield for those people instead of a mask?
Yes, we could.
Okay, then.
So all right, now why not face shields then? So I notice you don't have one.
What? These are much more convenient. These work for me. If I could not, if I had sleep if I had sleep apnea and low PPO2 numbers and could not wear this, I'd be wearing a face shield.
How commonly have you seen a face shield?
I have seen them on occasion.
On occasion. It's rare.
On occasion.
And so there must be some, I don't know what the reason might be, but it would seem to be, I just don't know. I've seen them, and they actually might give you a little more protection. And
I would have thought otherwise, but I will say, in our civil libertarian...
protection is the wrong word. I mean, you spread it less easily.
Of course. Yes. But in our civil libertarian tradition, we have always tried to carve out exceptions for those who truly need exceptions. And one example would be the conscientious objector, the religious exception, with the understanding that these are just that. They are exceptions. That in World War II, I would imagine the number of genuine conscientious objectors was fairly small, for instance.
Yes.
It was manageable. If we ultimately had 12 million people under arms, if 6 million of them had tried to claim conscientious objector status, I'll guarantee you the government would have said, well, sorry, that's too much. You're going to have to go do it anyway.
Yes.
So if you've really got sleep apnea and low oxygen numbers, all right, we'll carve out an exception for it. But I have a
well, they wear the mask. I
have a lot of trouble believing that is a statistically significant number of people.
Well, I mean, for sleep apnea, if you wear your machine,
you're just making excuses.
Well, no, I'm picking examples, which is apparently you just asserted it's reasonable to do that in our benign culture here.
Yeah.
Well, so there are some exceptions.
But what I'm talking about are the people who say, I can't breathe with the mask, it's killing me. I say, try a ventilator.
All right, let me move along to another subject that's similar to that, and that's how about 6 feet apart? What do you think about that?
I have no idea. I trust the medical professionals, and maybe I'm wrong to do that.
Well, you should. I mean, apparently what happened was, just to go through this, and one of the things that occurred, I mean, I'll go through this, the government should have been better prepared. There was evidence that, in fact, there was sort of the plan was in the lock safe. Open the safe up, here is the plan. and the plan had been decimated by political decisions, but it had been less robust. But because of the SARS epidemic in the early part of the century, particularly under the second President Bush, they put some plans in place to deal with this. They were neglected and taken out. Actually, President Trump did some of this just for saving money or different reasons. But when the crisis struck, the CDC, it's fair to say, they were beside themselves with what to do about it. And so they just said, what do we have here? What are it? And there were just random papers. It's late at night, Sunday night, there's a crisis. What are we going to? I found this paper. So the 6-foot number, I think, is just a pretty antiquated, incorrect number. And a better number, in retrospect, would be 3 feet. Mm-hmm. So you could say, well, 3 feet is going to work better. Additionally, a lot depends on where you're facing people. So if you're standing in a line, and at the airport or wherever you are, and everyone is facing straight ahead and not engaged in person-to-person conversation, then you really get much closer. But the 6-foot thing is just it's an arbitrary, capricious thing, mm-hmm. and a lot of what and I think that's what people are. The comment they're making is a lot of these regulations have been propagated. We're just on this emergency by unelected officials, you could say that have been in their little academic ivory tower for their whole life. And they have a very restricted view of outcome analysis. So their outcome analysis would be, on my watch, the number of people that became sick with coronavirus, the numbers dropped in half. Not counting the psychological dangers, hospitals close, people can't get in the emergency room, millions of people die. But there was a very narrow outcome analysis arrangement that was put there just because they had to pick a textbook up, and their whole life had been spent in the textbook, so to speak, and they were experts at it. But the broader issues of these decisions were less obvious. Well, okay, the other point I would make also about sitting close together. Have you watched any football games recently? Or seen them on television?
I'm not a football person, but
have you seen huge? Well, all right, rock concerts. How about science fiction?
Now, are you asking, have I actually been to one?
No, I've seen it on television. You briefly looked at the people that are there. Yeah. Well, maybe a science fiction convention might be better.
Well, there was Dragon Con, which I attended. 40,000 people over Labor Day weekend, which is half the number.
Were they? Presumably, if they were dragons or pretend dragons, really, they had masks on.
They had a mask.
So that's an advantage of that particular type of.
Yes, I will say I got both of my Moderna shots in the spring, but I also took the extra precaution of getting the J&J a few weeks before Dragon Con. So
good. Well, you've come through it in one piece.
Yes. But yeah, once again, it's the 6-foot distance. And it goes back, do we trust our government? And I might disagree with you a little bit, but presumably some of the people formulating health policy actually have real world experience in public health practice.
They do. Know. I mean, that's right. But they're treating smallpox epidemics or cholera epidemics. Right. But so it's a totally different beast they tangle with. It was very way past their experience.
But I would say that the same burden risk thing is going on at a statistical level. So for instance, would you agree with me that generally speaking, if the nationwide speed limit on all highways was 40 miles an hour, there would be fewer wrecks than if the speed limit was Autobahn? It goes fast.
Was that a leading question, Counselor? I don't.
No, you
leading. Oh no! All right. Okay. Well, I mean, I think you just parsed this out, whatever.
Yeah,
but that's their way. But in any event.
But generally speaking, lower speed limit, fewer casualties.
Within limits. Sometimes you drive along the highway, someone's going at 40 miles an hour, and it causes a wreck.
Yeah, but generally, statistically, and that's what we're talking here. We're talking statistics.
Well, I think that's fair.
And so you have to decide, and this is the cold-blooded calculus of torts and liability. If we go too slow, the economy stagnates, the goods don't get delivered, people don't get to the hospital in time, whatever. So how high speed limit with its concomitant excess mortality are we willing to tolerate? How much risk are we willing to tolerate compared to the burden that we impose on ourselves? And a lot of them, and you usually do have evidence to back it up. I mean, presumably, I'd have to, maybe I'm wrong about this, that when they picked 55 during the energy crisis, they had done some sort of study, at least in the lab, to decide 55 is better than 70, and it's X amount better than 70.
Sometimes politicians just have to do something. And that's what I'm getting into that a little bit. So let's really, with something, terrible crisis upon us, what kind of information do we don't have any information. Yeah. We just don't. But you have to do something.
Yeah,
you're the policymaker. People come in, look, you're going to have to go on television and say, I'm doing something. Mm-hmm. You could say now, I think the energy prices are heading up. Well, the president is going to say, I'm going on television and I'm going to put wind farms out there, or whatever the story is. Whether it's useful or not useful, it's going to do anything. Yeah. You have to do something.
I will say, a few years ago, when I wrote with my wife the biography of Fuller E. Calloway Jr., or Sr., he had a statement when he had retired, and he really did retire. He turned everything over to his lieutenants. And he was up in New York, and one of his major buyers, who was still down in LaGrange, Georgia, he was worried about what the cotton prices were doing. And so he sent Fuller Calloway a telegram, and he figured that since Calloway was actually up in New York, he could have a better real-time feel for what the prices were doing. So he asked Calloway, can you tell me what the cotton market is doing prices are doing right now, and what you think I should do? And Calloway, who had deliberately walked away from this, wrote back a very great telegram. Some say it's going up. Some say it's going down. I think so too. Whatever you do will be wrong. Act quick. And that was the whole thing. So
yes.
Yeah.
Well, that's right. And so maybe that's the way the crisis was managed. If people are unparalleled risk to the world, mm-hmm. and we're still actually in the middle of it. I can't say that we've necessarily ended this. And these regulations that are out there, I think they all do some good, and mm-hmm. just balancing the benefit. And the point I'm making is more people have had it. There've been more people vaccinated. Mm-hmm. The benefits from these restrictive policies become less obvious.
I do have a question about that, though. Let's say you get to the 70% figure, 75% that gets your R naught number down to acceptable levels, but you still have a number of people, say in the United States, numbering in the millions,
yes.
that still haven't been vaccinated. But what is the possibility of mutation in that population to something that can easily break through the existing vaccine?
You've raised a good point.
Yeah.
And this is the point about that, is it's not so much the danger in the U.S., but in other places. Yeah. So there are 8 billion people on the planet, and thousands and billions of people. I think the gross number of people have been vaccinated may be a billion or 2 billion, and there are at least 6 billion people that haven't been vaccinated with this infective virus. And so there is a tremendous chance that not so much here, but we're going to get, the Delta variant, I think, came from India. I think there's something that came out of Peru. Mm-hmm. And so the virus, this RNA virus, is going to mutate. There's no question about that. It's going to mutate. The question is the mutation, generally what happens, often this is what happens, when the virus mutates and becomes more infective, it often at the same time becomes less deadly. Kind of like influenza. Mm-hmm. So, a good comparison would be influenza and the Ebola virus. Mm-hmm. So the Ebola virus, it's so deadly it kills everybody on the spot, so it can't spread so much. Influenza is less deadly, but it can spread more easily. So that may well be what happened. But certainly the same risk that have happened with this with the coronavirus it's certainly likely to have some other offshoots. And the question is, with these offshoots, Are they going to, is the world's immune system going to be enough to deal with it, or is it going to find some chink in the armor where it could cause trouble? We can expect something from those other 6 billion people are out there. So the virus is going to mutate. Now, and when it mutates, it may not be such a big deal if we've already been vaccinated or had the original coronavirus. It might not be such a big deal. Or if it is, it may be because this RNA virus or RNA vaccine is such a tremendous breakthrough that we could easily deal with it.
Yes. Well, we'll just have to see. But it is the constantly changing shifts between the risks. I mean, the burdens are pretty much the same, but the risks can change the equation a good bit. And that's why I say it's time. I'm getting older,
yes,
and it's made me think more seriously, and so now it is more time for me to get the flu. I'd calculated that the flu was less risky and less deadly now, but as I get older, not the case. So
well, you can see the arguments that prevented you
yeah,
from are the same ones that people are using among themselves.
Yes, but I believe those.
Yes.
Yeah, but given the greater risk, I'd say that those arguments were unreasonable. But any approach like this, to put it in stock market terms, you want to set your stops low to protect yourself. But if you get the stops wrong, then you lose too much money. On the other hand, if you don't get out in time, you lose money or you could leave money sitting on the table. So do we go 1 foot distance? Do we go 3 feet, or do we go 25 feet? Yeah. At what point are you leaving money on the table versus, and that's maybe why they reacted so strongly at first, because if this thing had an even greater mortality rate than it did, to say 3 years ago, well, I guess we were trying not to shut down the economy. We didn't want to hurt the nation's economy. And with 500 million people dead, that's going to be a pretty lame argument. And once again, that's why politicians earn their money, to make those calls and take the heat if they get it wrong.
Yeah, earn is an interesting word. Earn is an interesting word. But on that note, Bucky, it's been great talking to you. We'll have to do this again. Good interchange tonight.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.